Varanasi, India, 5:47 in the morning. A man named Ramesh Tripathi is standing at the edge of the Ganges River, holding a flame in both hands. The ritual he's performing, Agnihotra, a Vedic fire offering, has been practiced without interruption for at least 3,500 years. The smoke rises, the river moves, he has no idea. 3 weeks earlier, at Harvard Medical School in Boston, a team of geneticists had just published the results of the largest ancient DNA study ever conducted on South Asia. 523 individuals, genes stretching back 8,000 years. And buried inside that data was something nobody in that room had gone looking for, something that would have been impossible to explain to Ramesh Tripathi, standing at that river, in that smoke. He carries more Bronze Age Russian steppe DNA than most ethnic Russians do. Let that settle for a second. The study was led by Dr. Vagesh Narasimhan at the Reich Laboratory, Harvard Medical School. What his team found was this: steppe pastoralist ancestry. The ancient genetic signature that science has long associated with the grasslands of southern Russia is, in modern South Asia, disproportionately concentrated in upper caste communities. Brahmin groups in particular. R1AZ93, the specific Y chromosome haplogroup that tracks the steppe migration, appears in 40 to 72% of Brahmin male lineages tested. The Russian population average for the broader R1A category sits at 46%, and that's before accounting for the regional variation that pulls it significantly lower in large parts of the country. The man performing a ritual at the Ganges carries a higher concentration of the genetic signature everyone calls Russian than most Russians do. And here's the part nobody talks about. His paternal lineage doesn't begin in Varanasi. It begins on a steppe that has never seen a monsoon, in a burial mound in what is now the Chelyabinsk Oblast of Russia 4,000 years ago. If you've ever actually wondered where humanity comes from, not the family story, not the textbook version, but the real biological answer beneath both of those, then subscribe. Because what this episode is about to show you goes deeper than most people are willing to go. The whole premise of Russian DNA is the first thing we need to take apart. Because it turns out Russia isn't the source, it's the relay station. And the people who got the signal most clearly, the ones who preserved it at the highest concentration, did so not because of geography. They did it because of social architecture, and that architecture is still standing. Opposite of what you'd expect. That's the only honest way to describe where this story actually begins. Picture the lower Volga River. Not today. 6,500 years ago, flat steppe grassland in every direction, no city, no written language, no monument that has survived. Somewhere in that emptiness, a few thousand people are living in ways that will eventually shape the genetic profile of roughly half the planet. And they will never know it. Because no one in 4,500 BCE has invented the concept of recording who they are. We didn't know these people existed until February 2025. That's when Dr. Iosif Lazaridis, working alongside Professor David Reich at Harvard Medical School and Professor Ron Pinhasi at the University of Vienna, published the results of an ancient DNA analysis covering 435 individuals from across Eurasia, spanning 6,400 to 2000 BCE. What they found was a population that had never been described before. They called them the Caucasus Lower Volga Group, CLV for short. People living between the northern foothills of the Caucasus Mountains and the lower Volga River, somewhere between 4,500 and 3,500 BCE. Here's why that matters. The Yamnaya, the Bronze Age pastoralists that archaeogenetics has been pointing to for a decade as the source of the Great European Migration, derived approximately 80% of their ancestry from this CLV group. 80%. The Yamnaya, who seeded the genetic profile of modern Russians, modern Europeans, modern South Asians, they were already downstream. The CLV were the actual source. So every time you've heard someone say Yamnaya DNA or Russian steppe DNA, they were describing a relay. The signal originated further back, in a population so anonymous that the field didn't even know to look for them until last year. But here's where it gets strange. The CLV group left nothing behind. No text, no named ruler. No language artifact we can point to. What they left is genomic. Their DNA is in the burial mounds of the Rostov Oblast in southern Russia, and it is, according to the 2025 Lazaridis study, the closest biological ancestor of both the person reading a genetic report in Moscow today and the Brahmin performing a fire ritual in Varanasi. Two completely different cultures, two completely different worlds. Same source. The same few thousand people from a nameless river valley are the biological root of both. And then those people apparently vanished. Around 3,500 BCE, the distinct CLV genetic signature stops appearing in new individuals. They become the Yamnaya. They transform rather than disappear. But the specific original signal, the pre-Yamnaya source, goes quiet in the archaeological record, almost quiet, because the 2025 study found something no one was looking for. A living population whose genome sits closer to the CLV source than almost anything else tested, in a location where that level of genetic preservation should be impossible. We'll get to that. But first, the machine that the CLV people built. They didn't disappear. They became something with reach. Sin-Tashta. Chelyabinsk Oblast, Russia, 2100 BCE. A fortified settlement, concentric wooden walls, 51 houses, and inside each house, a horse burial. These people have never built a city. They've never developed a writing system. What they have developed, and this is the thing that changes everything, is the spoke-wheeled chariot. Not just the chariot. The specific engineering logic of a lightweight, fast, maneuverable vehicle drawn by a domesticated horse. The first real military technology that can cross enormous distances and arrive before anyone knows it's coming. And they carried something else. In their Y chromosomes, specifically in a subclade called R1AZ93, was the genetic marker that would eventually turn up in fire rituals on the Ganges. But before it went south, it went west. Professor Wolfgang Hack at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig led the analysis of 69 ancient European genomes spanning 8,000 to 3,000 years ago. What his team published in Nature in 2015 was not subtle. The late Neolithic corded ware culture of Germany. The people who were Central Europe's dominant population at the time derived approximately 75% of their ancestry from the Yamnaya steppe population. 75%. Within a few hundred years of the expansion, beginning around 3000 BCE, steppe ancestry constituted at least half the genetic profile of Central European populations. Eastern European populations, the ancestors of modern Russians and Ukrainians, show Yamnaya contributions ranging from 42 to 50%. Think about what that number means in biological terms. The people who had been in Central Europe before this, the Neolithic farmers who built its monuments, who had cultivated its fields for 2,000 years, who had constructed its burial chambers and traded its goods, they essentially ceased to be the majority genetic component of their own descendants within 2 to 3 generations. Their culture survived in fragments. Their genome did not survive at all. At the Uhlau site in Saxony-Anhalt, Germany, around 2600 BCE, archaeologists found a mass grave, 13 individuals, signs of violent death. Ancient DNA analysis confirmed they carried predominantly Neolithic farmer ancestry, the exact genetic profile that was about to be demographically overwhelmed. They are among the last clear genetic photographs of pre-steppe Central Europe. After them, the picture changes permanently. This is not a migration. Migrations leave gradients. What the Hack data shows looks more like a wall. And here's the critical piece. The Yamnaya expansion moved in 2 directions at the same time. West into Europe, producing what eventually becomes the genetic background of modern Russians and most Europeans. And east, through Central Asia, through the mountain passes of what is now Pakistan, into the Indian subcontinent. Same source event, 2 completely different modern outcomes. The Western product mixed continuously for 4,000 years. The Eastern product in certain communities did not mix at all. That difference is everything, because the steppe ancestry in South Asia has a date on it, and that date refuses to stay neutral. The data arrived. Here is exactly when Swat Valley, what is now northwestern Pakistan, somewhere between 1900 and 1500 BCE. Archaeologists digging here in later decades would find something in the skeletal remains that would become one of the most contested datasets in the history of South Asian studies. Individual graves showing a genome in transition, some individuals, 0 steppe ancestry. Others from the same site a generation or 2 later, up to 22%. Not a trickle, not a gradual diffusion across centuries. A pulse, a demographic event with edges sharp enough to date, Dr. Narasimhan's team at Harvard analyzed those Swat Valley samples as part of the 523 genome study published in Science in 2019. What they confirmed, steppe ancestry entered South Asia beginning around 2000 to 1500 BCE, eventually contributing up to 30% of the ancestry of modern South Asian groups. And this is the finding that the field had to sit with. The genomic profile of this steppe ancestry in South Asia is identical to the profile found in Bronze Age Eastern Europe at the same period. Not similar, identical. The corded ware culture in Germany, the Sin-Tashta culture in Russia, and the incoming population in the Swat Valley. Same signal. 3 locations. 1 migration event that split at the steppe and arrived in 2 continents within a few centuries of each other. And yet, the data said the exact opposite of what everyone expected when they looked at the Indian subcontinent before the migration. Before approximately 2000 BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the largest urban cultures in human history, home to Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, a civilization of roughly 5 million people at its peak, showed zero-step ancestry in every sample tested. Not low, not trace levels, zero. Then the civilization goes into decline. Then the steppe ancestry appears. The sequence is not in dispute. What it means, whether the migrations contributed to the decline, arrived into a pre-existing vacuum, or were entirely unconnected, that debate is genuinely open, with strong arguments pointing to climate shifts and river system changes as the primary drivers. The genetics establishes sequence. It does not establish cause. Those are different things, and anyone who tells you otherwise is going beyond what the data actually shows. What the data does show, without ambiguity, is this. The specific individual who most clearly represents South Asia before the migration was a woman buried at Rakhigarhi in Haryana, India, around 2500 BCE. Ancient sample I-8726. Professor Vasant Shinde of the Deccan College Postgraduate and Research Institute in Pune led the analysis published in Cell in 2019. This woman, from the heart of the Harappan civilization, exactly where you'd expect to find the deepest roots of South Asian ancestry, carried zero-step ancestry. She lived 600 years before the pulse arrived. Her genome is the last clear photograph of South Asia before everything changed. Every South Asian alive today carries some proportion of her lineage mixed with the lineage of the people who came after her. Now, hold on. Before we go any further, I actually want to ask you something, because your answer matters to where this is going. In our last video, we tracked how a medieval army at Agincourt used biology almost like a weapon, chemical preparations that gave them a decisive advantage, and how the consequences of that choice echoed for generations. Here, the biology wasn't chosen, it arrived. So drop in the comments. Do you think the people who carried this DNA knew what they were doing? Or does that question even matter when consequences turned out to be the same either way? I mean it. I read them. Stay with me, because there are 3 things this next part reveals. The third one is the one that changes everything. What the data also shows, and this is the part the field spent years arguing about, is that the steppe ancestry in South Asia arrived predominantly through male lineages. Not through women, through men, fathers, patrilineal descent. And the social structure that subsequently formed around that asymmetry became the template for one of the most durable hierarchy systems in recorded human history. A hierarchy that is not just historical, that is currently generating case law in the world's most populous democracy. The window opened around 2000 BCE. It closed within a few centuries, and what came through it is still with us. They crossed. And what they built on the other side wasn't just a population, it was a structure. The 2011 Indian census recorded 79.8 million people identifying as Brahmin across India. The Harvard genetics data recorded that Brahmin communities show the highest concentration of steppe pastoralist ancestry among all South Asian populations analyzed. R1AZ93 frequencies reaching 40 to 72% in specific Brahmin subgroups. 2 datasets. 1 map. Dr. Narasimhan's 29 science paper states it explicitly, and I want to read the exact conclusion because this isn't something to paraphrase. Steppe ancestry in modern South Asians is, quote, primarily from males and disproportionately high in Brahmin and Bhumi-Har groups. That finding has been independently confirmed. Northwest Indian groups, Jats, Roars, Khatris, show 20 to 30% steppe ancestry. Upper caste groups across North India average 15 to 25%. The further south and the further down the traditional social hierarchy you measure, the lower the steppe percentage drops. The gene frequency map and the social hierarchy map are the same map. Now, everything I just told you, hold on to it, because it's about to mean something completely different. Because the obvious question is, why? Why did the incoming steppe ancestry concentrate in specific social groups and stay there? Why didn't it distribute evenly across the population the way it did in Europe, where 4,000 years of admixture has spread the same original signal across hundreds of millions of people at much lower individual concentrations? The answer is one word: endogamy. Endogamy means marriage exclusively within your own group. The caste system, specifically the Jati system of marriage rules, functioned from a purely genetic perspective as a near-perfect preservation mechanism. It prevented the mixing that would have diluted the incoming steppe signal. It kept the concentration high where it first landed. And it did this not for 1 generation or 10, but for approximately 4,000 years. A study of West Maharashtra populations by Coutinho and colleagues, published in Scientific Reports in 2020, found Dashastha Brahmin individuals showing the highest steppe ancestry concentrations of any group tested in the region. higher than any non-Brahmin population in the same geographic area, despite those populations having been exposed to exactly the same external ancestry sources for millennia. Same geography, different outcome. The only variable that explains the difference is who was allowed to marry whom. The caste system did not just stratify society, it stratified the genome, and then there's the Kailash, the Chitral Valley in northwestern Pakistan. Population approximately 3,500. The Kailash are the most genetically isolated populations in South Asia, and their steppe ancestry proportion exceeds 30%, higher than most ethnic Russians. They have maintained a level of genetic preservation that should not exist after 3,000 years in a region with constant contact from surrounding populations. The social walls never came down, and the genome shows it. This isn't just ancient history. This is in living bodies right now, in a valley you can find on Google Maps, in a community of 3,500 people who have accidentally preserved a Bronze Age genome at Bronze Age concentration levels because of rules about who their grandparents were allowed to marry. And the legal dimension of this is not abstract. The caste system in India is constitutionally recognized. Articles 15 and 16 of the Indian Constitution form the basis of a reservation policy, positive discrimination for historically disadvantaged groups that is actively litigated, actively contested, and actively shapes the life outcomes of hundreds of millions of people today. The genetic stratification documented by Harvard in 2019 is not a relic. Its social and legal consequences are current. A 4,000-year-old migration event has modern GPS coordinates, and those coordinates appear in newspaper headlines every month. Before we accept those coordinates, let's try to refuse them. I mean that seriously. Because if the argument this episode is building is going to hold up, it has to survive the strongest possible objection. Not a weak version, the real one, presented at full strength. So here it is. A significant thread in the archaeogenetics literature argues that R1A-L657, the specific sub-branch of R1A that makes up approximately 70% of all R1A found in modern India, is not from the steppe at all. It's indigenous to the Indian subcontinent. If that's correct, then the high R1A frequency in Brahmin populations doesn't reflect Bronze Age migration. It reflects local population dynamics that developed entirely within South Asia, without any external input. And if that's true, the migration hierarchy connection doesn't just weaken, it dissolves completely. This isn't a fringe position. For several years, it had real traction in specific academic and public discourse communities. The argument mattered because the stakes were high. If the steppe connection is real, the genetic record implicates specific migration events in the formation of hierarchy, men arriving from outside, carrying a specific paternal lineage, and the social structure forming around that asymmetry. But if the R1A is local, then the hierarchy formed entirely from within, endogenously, without external force. These are not equivalent conclusions. They describe completely different histories. And yet, the data said the exact opposite. In February 2025, the Lazaridis team published their analysis of 435 ancient individuals spanning 6,400 to 2000 BCE. This is the largest and most comprehensive ancient DNA study of the Indo-European question ever conducted. And it addressed the indigenous R1A argument directly, not through modeling or inference, but through ancient samples. The Bronze Age Sintashta and Andronovo sites in Russia and Kazakhstan carry R1A Z93 at high frequency. Ancient South Asian samples before 2000 BCE carry 0 R1A Z93. Ancient South Asian samples after 2000 BCE carry it in direct proportion to their measured steppe ancestry percentage. The pattern is unambiguous and it repeats across every site, every time period, every dataset. The local origin hypothesis cannot account for that sequence. But here's the specific moment where the argument ends. Remember sample I-8726, the Rakhigari woman, 2500 BCE, from the heart of the Harappan civilization? The indigenous R1A hypothesis requires R1A to have been present in South Asia before the migration. Her genome is from exactly the right time, exactly the right place. She carries 0 R1A. Her skeleton ends the argument, not weakens it, ends it, which means everything this episode has argued holds up. The steppe signal is real. The migration is real. The male-dominant nature of that migration is real. And the correspondence between the steppe frequency map and the social hierarchy map is not a coincidence or a statistical artifact. It is a record. What the field has not yet fully processed, and what the 2025 Lazaridis data now makes unavoidable, is that the people who generated this signal, the Caucasus Lower Volga group, were not a single uniform population. They were already a composite. a mixture of Eastern European hunter-gatherer ancestry and Caucasus Neolithic ancestry combined in a specific proportion that has never been found anywhere else at that time period. And within that composite, there is a component that the 2025 study identifies as the source of all Indo-European language spread, but whose living descendants appear in a location that should not, by any reasonable model, have preserved them at this concentration. A lineage the field assumed was thoroughly diluted, a living ghost. Chitral Valley, northwestern Pakistan. Altitude 1,500 meters. 3,500 people live here. They are called the Kalash. And if you ran their genome against the 435 ancient individuals in the 2025 Lazaridis dataset, you would find something that stops you mid-sentence. Their steppe ancestry percentage exceeds that of most ethnic Russians, not slightly, measurably. The people sitting closest to the Caucasus-Lower-Volga genetic source, the truest biological archive of the population that seeded half the world's language family, are not in Moscow. They are in a high-altitude valley in Pakistan, and they have maintained that concentration not by accident, but by 3,000 years of social enforcement, 3,000 years of rules about who you are allowed to marry, and the genome held. The Narasimhan study confirmed the same pattern at scale. Multiple independent population genetics analyses, cross-referenced against the AADR dataset, the Ancient Archaeogenomics Reference Database, show specific South Asian groups carrying autosomal steppe ancestry percentages and R1AZ93Y chromosome frequencies that exceed the average figures for modern Russians. The explanation is straightforward, and it is devastating. Russians mixed. 4,000 years of contact with Eastern European hunter-gatherer populations, Siberian lineages, Uralic-related groups, the signal diluted. It distributed. It spread across a vast geographic area at lower individual concentration. That's what happens to a genetic signal in a population with open social boundaries. It diffuses. The Kalash didn't diffuse. Certain Brahmin lineages didn't diffuse. The social walls held. And inside those walls, the steppe signal stayed at Bronze Age concentration. What this means for the video title, "Scientists Tested Russians' DNA in Every Race," is that the title was a question. And the answer is, the group with the highest measured concentration of what everyone calls Russian steppe DNA are men performing fire rituals that have run continuously since before the Roman Empire existed. Here is the detonation point of this entire episode, stated as plainly as I can say it. The men with the highest concentration of steppe DNA on Earth today are not Russian. They are Brahmin priests in North India and Kalash herdsmen in northern Pakistan. And the social system that kept their genome concentrated enough to measure 4,000 years later is called respectively the caste system and highland endogamy. The steppe did not just seed a population, it seeded a power structure, and the power structure preserved the seed. A study of West Maharashtra populations. Coutinho and colleagues, Scientific Reports 2020, tested Deshasta Brahmin individuals against every other population group in the same region. The Brahmins showed the highest steppe ancestry of anyone tested. The geographic exposure of every group in the study was identical. They all lived in the same region for millennia. The only variable that explains one group maintaining a higher steppe concentration than all others is endogamy. 2,000 years of it, recorded in the genome with the precision of a laboratory instrument. This is not a metaphor about ancestry. This is a measurement. And the Yamnaya themselves, the people everyone points to as the source, were already a composite when this began. Already 80% CLV, 20% something else, a mixture that was itself in motion. Which means the Brahmins in North India are not simply descended from Yamnaya. They carry a signal that traces back through the Yamnaya to a population older and more anonymous than the Yamnaya. A population we didn't even know existed until a study published 14 months ago. But here's what the 2025 data found that the field is still absorbing. The Yamnaya were not a single people. They were a composite. And within that composite, two different paternal lineages, R1b Z2103 and R1a, were already taking different roads. R1b went west, R1a went east. And the reason that the Indian subcontinent shows R1a at Brahmin-dominant frequencies while Western Europe shows R1b at Celtic and Basque frequencies is that a single original source population split along a patrilineal fault line, and the two halves of that split built completely different civilizations on different continents and have spent the last 3,000 years treating each other as strangers. They aren't. 4,000 years is a long time for a secret to hold, but genomes are not designed to keep secrets. They are designed to replicate, and what they replicate carries the memory of every bottleneck, every migration, every wall, social or geographic, that shaped the population that passed it forward. The specific genetic bottleneck that determined whether any steppe ancestry reached South Asia at all has been identified by population geneticists using a statistical method that works backward from modern genomes. A valley, a mountain pass, a specific narrow corridor through the Hindu Kush range in what is now northwestern Pakistan. Almost certainly the Bolan Pass or the Khyber Pass region, the same corridors that every subsequent invader of the subcontinent would use for the next 3,000 years because there is no other way through. The 2019 Narasimhan study identified that of the 140 South Asian populations analyzed, a handful show a statistical spike in steppe ancestry that stands apart from all others. These populations are not spread across the subcontinent randomly. They cluster geographically and socially. Almost all are either historically associated with the priestly functions of early Vedic religion, or they are populations that maintained strict endogamy in high-altitude environments far from the mixing pressures of the lowland populations. One specific bottleneck, one corridor, one winter that a group of people survived or did not survive 4,000 years ago. And the outcome of that single moment is why specific communities in India today carry a genetic signal at concentrations that exceed the source population's homeland. Here's the part that the inherited trauma research makes genuinely strange. There is a body of work in epigenetics, the study of heritable changes in gene expression that don't alter the DNA sequence itself, suggesting that specific stress responses, survival adaptations, and physiological patterns can be passed across generations through mechanisms that are not fully understood. The evidence for this is preliminary. The field is actively debating its extent and reliability. But what is confirmed and what the archaeogenomics data makes structurally interesting is this. The populations that pass through the most severe genetic bottlenecks, the narrowest corridors, the smallest founding groups, show measurable signatures of that narrowness in their modern genomes. Low genetic diversity in specific regions, elevated frequencies of founder variants, statistical fingerprints of a population that nearly didn't make it. The steppe ancestry in South Asian Brahmin genomes carries those fingerprints. The Kalash carry them at even higher resolution. What you are looking at when you measure R1AZ93 frequency in a Brahmin population is not just an ancestry percentage. It is the biological record of a population that crossed a mountain range 4,000 years ago, entered a new continent, and then, through social architecture, prevented that record from blurring. The body kept the memory. The mind built the system that kept the body from forgetting. And there is one final dimension to this that the 2025 Lazaridis data opened up, one that the field is only beginning to process. Because the Caucasus Lower Volga people, the original source, were not just the genetic ancestors of the Yamnaya. According to the 2025 study, they were also ancestral to the Indo-Anatolian speakers, the people whose language became Hittite, the oldest documented branch of the Indo-European family. Which means the CLV group is the common ancestor of both the Bronze Age pastoralists who seeded the Brahmin lineage and the Bronze Age Anatolians who spoke a language older than Sanskrit. Two completely separate civilizations, two completely separate continents, one source, and in a living Brahmin in Varanasi, and in a Kalash herdsman's in Chitral, something of that source is still measurable. Go back to Varanasi, go back to the river. Ramesh Tripathi is still there in some version of every morning since this ritual was first performed. The flame in his hands descends from a tradition that Bronze Age steppe pastoralists carried into the subcontinent 4,000 years ago. The specific fire ritual, Agnihotra, has direct structural parallels in the Avestan fire traditions of ancient Iran, which also carry steppe ancestry, which also trace back to the same migration event, which also trace back, ultimately, to a few thousand people standing beside a river in southern Russia that no one has named. The witness gene is what population geneticists sometimes call a variant that exists only in the descendants of one specific ancient event, not a haplogroup, a specific mutation, carried only by the people whose ancestors survived a particular bottleneck and no one else. R1AZ93 functions as close to a witness gene as the steppe migration has produced. It does not appear in South Asia before 2000 BCE, it appears after. It clusters in the communities that maintain the strictest endogamy, and it is present right now in millions of living men whose paternal ancestry descends in an unbroken line from the Bronze Age steppe. They carry it in their bodies. They don't know they carry it. Some are performing rituals that descend directly from the culture of the people who brought it. That is not metaphor. That is measurement. Now, think about what you actually know about yourself. If you're South Asian, particularly if your family comes from a traditionally upper caste background in North India, there is a statistical probability, not a certainty, but a real probability, that your Y chromosome or your autosomal ancestry carries a measurable trace of this specific migration. If you're Eastern European, Russian, Polish, Ukrainian, Czech, you carry a different branch of the same source signal, more diluted, more distributed, but present. If you speak an Indo-European language at all, English, French, Persian, Hindi, Spanish, Bengali, the language itself is the cultural inheritance of the same Bronze Age expansion that left this genetic mark. This is not a story about other people. The question that the 2025 Lazaridis study leaves open, that it explicitly does not answer, and that may not be answerable, is whether the social hierarchy that preserved the steppe signal in South Asia was a deliberate construction by the incoming steppe ancestry men, or whether it emerged from the interaction between incoming and existing populations, or whether it was something else entirely, a gradual crystallization of difference that no individual designed and no single moment created. The genomics can tell us the signal entered from the north, arrived predominantly through male lineages, and concentrated in the communities that became the priestly and warrior classes of early Vedic society. It cannot tell us what those men intended. It cannot tell us what the women who married them understood about what was happening. It cannot tell us whether the hierarchy that formed around the genetic asymmetry was inevitable or contingent, whether it would have happened differently if one mountain pass had been blocked by a rockfall in 1900 BCE. We don't know. We may never know. What we know is the outcome. A nameless group of people beside the lower Volga River, 6,500 years ago, generated a genetic signal. That signal traveled west and became the genetic background of modern Europe. It traveled east and became the genetic background of the people who constructed one of the most durable social hierarchies in recorded human history. In Russia, it mixed and diffused over 4 millennia. In specific communities in South Asia, it was preserved, deliberately, structurally, legally, at concentrations that exceed the homeland. The people who outrank Russians in Russian DNA are not a curiosity. They are the evidence. The fire ritual at the Ganges at 5:47 in the morning is not a relic. It is a data point. And the question of what the man holding that flame owes to the steppe, or what the steppe owes to him, that question was never answered 4,000 years ago. It still hasn't been.